Good morning. I'm Carlos Fernandez, Policy Analyst at the Vegas Chamber. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to the Growing Nevada's Trade Ties with Canada in the post-COVID-19 era with Canada's Consul General, Zaib, Shaikh, Business Council of Canada founder and CEO, Richard Perkins, and the Vegas Chamber President and CEO, Beth Sewald. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to explain the feature of this call. In order to preserve high sound quality, we'll be reading everyone on the call besides our presenters to make it easier for everyone to hear. If you'd like to ask a question, there are a few ways you could do so. If you're joining this call on the web or through the mobile app, you can ask a question by using the chat feature on the interface. We'll ask your question on your behalf. You can also ask a question by clicking the hand raise button on the interface. We'll call your name and unmute your line so you can ask your question. Once you have asked your question, we will re-mute your line so that everyone on the call can hear the answer. In order to preserve time, we ask that you please keep questions brief. We'll be taking all questions at the end of the call. And now please welcome the Vegas Chamber's President and CEO, Beth Sewald.
Thank you so much, Carlos, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today as we partner with the Canadian Consulate for a discussion about the new US-Mexico-Canada agreement. The USMCA was recently ratified by all three nations to replace and modernize the North America Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA. During this webinar today, we will be hearing from the Consul General of Canada, Zaib Shaikh. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you. And also the founder and CEO of the Business Council of Canada and Nevada, Richard Perkins. We're going to talk about key elements of the USMCA that are going to benefit Nevada businesses. And we're also going to talk about the critical importance of the continuing to grow the Canadian trade and investment in the greater Las Vegas area and across the state. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have you today.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, yes. Before we get to our speakers, I want to highlight just a couple of Vegas Chamber programs for you. This week, the Vegas Chamber is joining with the Urban Chamber and also the LVGEA on a webinar called Creating Equitable Communities, a conversation connecting social injustice with economic development. It's a very long title, but you're definitely not going to want to miss that. That's tomorrow, July 23rd at 2 o'clock, and you can register by going on vegaschamber.com. Also, enrollment for Leadership Advance is still open. This is a 5-month program that really gives a lot of training and the training necessary to be a good leader, especially during these challenging times. So for more information on that, you can also go to vegaschamber.com as well. And then last, the Southern Nevada Forum Committees are fully engaged. They're convening right now, and they really do make effective change right here in Southern Nevada and across the state. So for more information there on how you can engage, if you want to get involved, you can email our very own Vegas Chambers, Dylan Keith at dkeith@vegaschamber.com. All right, and now it is my pleasure to welcome our guests today. We're very excited, as I said, to have you both, Zaib Shaikh, Consul General of Canada, and also Richard Perkins, the founder and CEO of Business Council of Canada and Nevada. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Consul General Shaikh, we'll start with you. Your main offices are based in LA, based in Los Angeles. Give us a little bit of an idea about how often and in what capacity you and your teams conduct outreach across Nevada.
Thanks, Beth, and great to be part of this discussion, and great to hear the discussions that you're actually having. We'll get more into it, obviously, as we talk about USMCA, but this idea of equity, inclusion, and what it means to a business is really key for Canada. And I think USMCA can actually help all those kinds of initiatives and those business owners. And we'll get into that for sure. But, you know, our territory that we represent in terms of Canada is really Southwest US. And so it's Southern California, Nevada, and Arizona. And so while our offices are for sure based in Los Angeles, because of the outreach that happens, we're actually really connected to Nevada through Carson City, through Las Vegas, of course, and through Reno. And some of our biggest connectivity happens through Richard's organization. And he's such a closely connected person to the business and political community of Nevada, locally and on the state level, that really helps us. We've been together in good times and bad, right? in 2017, our consular team was on the ground when the Harvest Festival shooting happened. We Canadians were among the 500 wounded, and in fact, 4 Canadians were among the dozens killed in that tragedy. So our consulate general and our consul general at that time, my predecessor and the team that we worked with, were on the ground helping on so many levels, and in fact have commemorated and supported the memorial garden, of course. And that's, you know, that's a human side of what we do. Because we're there, and it wasn't just human in the sense, it was very functional and operational, because of course there was a whole security issue there. And so we were on the ground there helping. And then we have really important, amazing, positive moments, such as when Richard and I were part of the gender parity for the first time in the Senate and Assembly for Nevada. And you know, Canada was part of that proclamation. It hangs proudly in my office here. One of the first things that I got to be a part of, and for Canada, that's a hugely important moment. And then, of course, there's our team. It's very connected, whether it's with Richards or whether the businesses that happen in the community throughout the state. We are there on the ground on a bi-monthly level. Myself, Richard knows, we're very connected. So much happens in Vegas, of course. The world comes to Vegas. And so whether it's amazing moments like CES or other major conventions that happen in Vegas, our business team, our policy team, myself, Richard, we're always really connected to what happens out of Nevada for the world. And we also fight the good fight, and we're also there to hug each other, and we're also there to cheer with each other, because there's some great hockey teams there too.
That's right. I know. Go Knights, go. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I know our viewers and our members appreciate your engagement. As a follow-up question to that, just before we get to Richard, can you talk a little bit about how the public and private sector representatives from across the Silver State really helped your team's efforts to spread the word about the importance of continued free trade without barriers?
Absolutely, thank you. Great questions, and really proud to say that, you know, we have to these kind of great questions, I think there's some great answers actually, because it speaks to the relationship, whether it's the chamber that's obviously done amazing work with Richard's fine team and us, or whether it was frankly right up to the highest offices of the state with Governor Sisolak and his predecessor, Governor Sandoval, right? Major proponents, advocates, leading the charge about what the benefits were for USMCA and why it needed to ratify quickly and ratify together. That's an impressive statement from the state. Then, of course, the team at the Governor's Office of Economic Development, right out of Carson City, right, and the Department of Agriculture. These folks have played invaluable connectivity points, but also real functional and administrative points, because of course, bureaucracy is always part of this as well. It doesn't matter whether you're running an entrepreneurship, and that's why we'll talk more about USMCA, I know, but this idea of bridging the gap and what Nevada's public and private sector, how they came together for this particular document is really impressive. Whether again, it's, you know, Representative Mark Amadai, who was surprised, but who, when he found out that, you know, there's an export worth $800 million, he's flying the flag of Canada in his offices as right next to his pride with the American flag. And it's really amazing for us to see this kind of support and leadership. And as I mentioned earlier, this idea that we, you know, gender parity from state majority and assembly leadership, or mayors across the state, you know, everyone really publicly came together to support this idea of free trade between these three countries, because they understood the integral relationship that we have together on so many levels. Academic, as in fact, you know, UNLV, the Reno campus, very closely connected through our offices and to what is happening between Canada and the US. The Nevada Manufacturers Association, the Nevada Builders Alliance, I mean, you know, leading chambers, as I mentioned yourself, and the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. the fact that I can even, whip off these name drop like you wouldn't believe, it speaks to the amazing connectivity that we have, because these doors are open. Again, folks like Richard and yourself help open those doors. But once we're there, I think it's a real compelling story and positivity that this unity has for our countries. And it really behooves us to take advantage in the most positive way for this relationship to really prosper. It has, but actually there's much more to do, and there's much more possible. Anyway, I know it's a long-winded answer, but I wanted to be clear about how amazingly connected we really are and how amazingly thankful we are to the public and private sector that this happened and that we're together.
Yeah, you are absolutely right, Consul General. And speaking of being connected and leaders in being leaders in Nevada, Richard, you are a proud Nevadan. You've your background, your reputation precedes you. Your background in serving in the state legislature as the second longest serving Speaker of the Assembly, Chief of Police in Henderson. After retiring from public service, you founded the Perkins Company, your public relations firm, and you are running the Business Council of Canada and Nevada, or the BCCN. So, I don't know how you find time for everything, but give us a little bit of an idea as to what all it is you do and how you work together with the Canadian government.
Well, and thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you to the Vegas Chamber for hosting this event and allowing this forum so that we can have this conversation. I think it's very, very important. It's only time, right? We only have time to spend, and we might as well spend it wisely. So, I find that the Business Council has some very similar goals and some overlap to the things I do in government relations and public affairs, dealing with those same businesses and governmental entities, and just it's really been a passion. We started this 4.5 years ago, and just as a quick background, there was not a business council in Nevada that in the service territory for the Consulate in Los Angeles. And Zaib's predecessor reached out to my wife, actually, because she worked for Sasha worked for the Canadian government for 5 years in the Consulate in Minneapolis and in the embassy in Washington, D.C. And she knew some of the folks that worked in the Consulate, and there was some outreach there, but she has a day job and was unable to sort of fill that role. And that's how I kind of got looped into it. And it's been a labor of love ever since. We've been able to really find some success here. The Consulate is one of our most important strategic partners, as is the Governor's Office on Economic Development, and the chambers and the LVGEA and others. So it's really been a lot of satisfying effort, if you will. As you mentioned, I was born and raised here, so I like to see the successes of our community, and many of those successes, I believe, will be served, especially through the relationship we have with Canada and its business community, and on both sides of the border. And I should throw a shout out as well to Michael Brown, who's the Director of Governor's Office on Economic Development. He was, at the time, the head of Barrick Gold when we started this business council. Barrick Gold is a Toronto company. So he was very supportive and our flagship member when we got started. So that's sort of how we got going. We work very closely with Zaib and his team and the provinces as well. All the provincial governments have their trade teams, and we work with them. And I should mention too that the mission of the Business Council is threefold. It's bilateral tourism, bilateral trade, and bilateral foreign direct investment. So we help companies in Nevada that want to do export into Canada or plant a flag up there and put an office, and as well for those Canadian companies that want to do business in Nevada. So it's been really interesting to do, and there are a lot of services that we provide, but I'm sure we'll work into that further into this program.
Well, Richard, we certainly appreciate your service to the state, and this is extremely exciting, as we all know. And we all know that USMCA was actually implemented earlier this month on July 1st. That happens to be Canada Day. How exciting is that? Consul General Shaikh, please tell us what Canada is particularly excited about in terms of the upgrades from NAFTA.
Thanks, Mary Beth. And yeah, absolutely. Canada Day was an exciting time because it also actually, you know, we always, Canada Day and the 4th of July, they're really tied together in so many ways, but also just by proximity of days. And so we had this idea that Canada Day was the date where this amazing agreement was enforced. And then for it to be the 4th of July, especially in this pandemic year, and I know again we'll get into that as well, but that was really meaningful because it represents, frankly, a real possibility for recovery and reset. After all, it was because of NAFTA that the three countries share a $19 trillion regional market with upwards of 470 million consumers. And so that's not just the market for us as the North American alliance that is Canada, US, and Mexico, but in fact, on a global level, that's what that means to the world. And a $19 trillion regional market is guaranteed an impressive statement to make on the global economic front. So that's really exciting about what USMCA really means for the next phase. And when we were working on it, when the three countries were working on it, they didn't understand and didn't realize, although I guess the warning signals were there, that something like the pandemic was going to hit. And so USMCA coming into enforcement at this stage as the most modern world's agreement in terms of its binding rules, in terms of its mechanisms for disputes that are in between them, between the three countries, the sovereign nations, and also the mechanisms towards inclusivity. For SMEs, for gender parity, for the environment, for indigenous communities, for diverse communities and business owners. This is really meaningful as we look to the next phase coming out of pandemic and as the US knows what's happening in terms of the idea of access and equity. And that plays a really exciting part for what Canada sees as USMCA comes into enforcement. I mean, these aren't small things for us. When I talk about tying that $19 trillion market and tying it with unprecedented inclusivity for business owners, and then to talk about what the agreement means in a digital economy, because when NAFTA first came about, of course, 25 years ago, a quarter of a century ago now, the idea of digital commerce and digital IP was meaningless. We didn't even know what we didn't know. And to have this agreement now understand and give access and opportunity to digital and e-commerce retailers and owners and that market, this allows for that to happen. And if this agreement wasn't there, would the businesses be there? Of course, but would the businesses between the three countries and these supply chains be able to move this quickly, this fast, this cheaply, and have this many people be part of it? No, it takes a massive agreement and a very general, of course, agreement in some cases, like the USMCA, to really allow that. And then it becomes the work of folks like us on this call, helping those business owners really make meaningful sense of that. And then the policy folks like the senators and the Congress folks that I'm talking about, they can really see the value of that possibility. And I know I'm speaking in general terms, and I know that Richard can be more specific as well, but I really want to kind of lay out the intention and the scope and possibility of what USMCA means and why Canada, of course, it's really excited about all the things that I talked about in there. But Canada is really excited because it's part of and led an effort for this kind of modern agreement to even be around in the first place. And as we hit the pandemic and come out of it, the world is looking for solutions, and USMCA is a major solution.
Well, and speaking of looking for solutions, Richard, let's bring this home for a second. I know there are a lot of modernized provisions that are going to affect businesses all across the country. And, specifically, what are some of the things, as you know, the biggest chamber is always advocating for our members and for business in general. So what are some of the modernized provisions that businesses across the country and specifically in Las Vegas and Nevada, what can they look forward to?
Sure, and Zaib covered at a macro level a lot of this information, but I think we'll start with just the fact that we've got certainty now. The agreement itself provides so much certainty. We're not worrying about whether NAFTA 2.0, whatever it was called during the negotiations is going to happen. It happened. And there are dispute resolution provisions that I think are really helpful to businesses here. Those dispute resolution issues go out and provide certainty. And as well, the length of the agreement itself is, there was at one time a proposal that it'd only be 5 years long. What businesses here in Nevada could even plan on only a 5-year horizon. So that's been extended, and those things are going to be very helpful. The fact that there are few or no tariffs in so many of the areas of it, those things are just really boost the trade opportunities for many of our businesses. But specifically, when you get into the gender equity issues, there's not a specific chapter on that, but it's woven throughout the entire agreement. So gender equity is a really big thing. That certainly helps out some of our women and minority-owned businesses. The digital chapters, as Zaib pointed out, 26 years ago, we didn't understand e-commerce or the tech processes that we would have today. The intellectual property that is now protected and can freely pass across the borders, north and south. So those will certainly help our tech sector. There's a dedicated chapter on small and medium-sized business enterprises. And there are actually information tools in the agreement that provide help to those enterprises so that they can figure out how to best operate, and whether it's a manufacturing entity that wants to export or import, or just the services that can be provided. Those SMEs can be really, really helped out. And then there's an environmental chapter that really brought home, it was a big focus of the agreement. Not only does that then help us with a clean environment, but it also helps us move forward with those businesses that focus on climate change and renewable energies and things like that. So that will be super helpful and give a boost to those Nevada companies that do those sorts of things. And then lastly, for mostly our friends in the northern part of the state, the dairy and agriculture agreements that are almost tariff-free. It will certainly promote more exporting of our dairy and agricultural products to Canada and the importation of those. So those are the pieces of the agreement. Manufacturing as a whole is going to benefit, but those are the specific aspects that really jump out at me.
Okay, that's great. It kind of answers my next question in a way, but I want to drill down and get a little bit more specific. You may know that the Vegas Chamber recently collaborated with the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance and Workforce Connections on the Workforce Blueprint 2.0. And we were able to identify the top emerging sectors across Southern Nevada, certainly. Of the ones you just mentioned, of Nevada's top sectors, which ones do you think will benefit the most across Nevada from these updates?
Well, the four that really jump out at me are the small and medium business enterprises. Those small businesses, the bulk of your membership, I suspect, would benefit because of the informational tools and the ability for them to really find different markets and expand their businesses. Agriculture I mentioned as well, mostly in the northern part of the state, but there is some agriculture down here. There's not much. We're actually, more than people understand, a huge agricultural state, and of the $1 billion of goods that we export into Canada every year, a large portion of that is agriculture. The tech sector, I think the tech sector really benefits from this agreement because of the intellectual property protections, the ability to send the information and the services across the borders without any concerns. It's a free open highway that way. So the tech sector will certainly benefit. And tech sector, in my view, is tied very closely to these days because of storage capacities and companies like Switch that provide those data warehousing opportunities. That a lot of that data comes from north of the border, but they are also inextricably interwoven into the renewable energy sector as well. So I think all of that will, those four areas are the areas that I think will benefit the most.
Okay, excellent. Now, we all know that the global economy is still reeling from the pandemic, right? There are no two ways around that. And there's a long road to recovery ahead for all of us. Coronavirus has actually given a lot of momentum to the process of deglobalization. So if you would, both of you take like just 2 minutes and share with us why now more than ever, a North American regionalist approach aided by USMCA is the best way forward as opposed to a divisive approach. Consul General, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Well, I think one of the key figures that stands out for me, and yes, it was in a kind of pre-pandemic world, just as the onset and less the onset, because the onset was early, but the realization and the transference to the US was later, of course. And so in that pre-time, it was determined as USMCA was really coming, getting its momentum in the early part of the year, that the USMCA would raise US GDP by 68.2 billion by its 6th year of existence, and also would be helping to have 176,000 jobs on the market by that time. So yes, we're in a pre-pandemic time, or well, we're in a pandemic time, and hopefully we'll be in a post-pandemic time soon. But the idea of what the USMCA can achieve is still on the table. It just has to be used and activated in the way because it's ready. And as of July 1st, it's open for business, literally. So that's a key, I think, figure to talk about what it means to the region. I think what's also really key now, you mentioned deglobalization and you mentioned this idea of regionalism, is that, free and fair trade matters more now than ever. That's the only way to really be able to not only fight the pandemic in terms of the supply chain that it's going to take to fight that, but then in order to get into recovery from health tech, from education, from tech, from finance, and the amount of freeness and fairness that is in that recovery and in that fight is going to determine how well we come out of it. And our unity within that framework is also going to be a clear signal of whether we can even get out of it and how we get out of it and how fast we get out of it. And so I think this idea of, I'll be honest, I'm big and I'm gung-ho on the agreement, but what's in some cases dampening that spirit are sentiments such as Buy America only, right? It's hard to talk about tariffs on each other when you're celebrating a free trade agreement. And so I think it's important to remember that as we look, and I shout out to the Nevada Mining Association, who before, the organization that before the USMCA did come into effect and Canada had those tariffs, really wrote a really articulate and a clear document on why those were not good, those tariffs for both countries, and it was successful in getting those revoked. So those kinds of, this idea of tariffs and Buy America only to get local in this regional possibility isn't to anyone's benefit, and it won't help that 68.2 billion number that I quoted earlier, and that 176,000 jobs. And as Richard has outlined, right, Nevada and Canada have such an intrinsic relationship when it comes to that supply chain of jobs, foreign direct investment, investment in a multi-sector world. In a new world, when we talk about renewable energy, when we talk about tech, that's Nevada is really leading. And then when we talk about the tourism market, that's at the end of the supply chain, is the happiness and the ability and ease to travel back and forth. And when Canadians come are the #1 international market for tourism in Nevada, to the tune of 1 million people, annually, that spending power is going to be dampened. And that money will be spent elsewhere, not by Canadians, but by everyone. And for us to be that generator of that economic engine that, we've quoted the numbers in terms of the $1 trillion and the billions at stake here, and the hundreds of thousands of jobs at stake here, which Nevada is an integral part of that, as again, we talked about. That is going to be key. And anything to discredit or get in the way of that is going to only hinder us. And we got to be fast and nimble and generous with each other. And
Richard, what would be your thoughts on the regionalist approach?
Well, and I'll just echo a lot of what Zaib just said. Buy America is an interesting concept, but it generally doesn't work. It's such a small group of folks that actually works for, because the supply chain itself is very complex. A lot of the parts and pieces come from all over the world, and many of them locally. But I'll break it down into two pieces. We're gonna get out of this pandemic because of the relationship that we've got amongst these three countries and what we can do for each other. I'm helping, support the governor's COVID-19 task force. We're still looking for personal protective equipment, and frankly, we need to get it more, source it from places closer than China. And those sources are actually in Mexico and Canada. And Canadians the same way. We've talked with the Consulate about ventilator manufacturing, that sort of thing, in a local sense that will help them, and vice versa. So there's the pandemic part of it, but as well, the first source, or the first place that our businesses are going to recover from the market's going to be the closer markets, the markets that they can get their products out to more quickly. And beyond this continent, that's going to be much more challenging, and that's why this agreement is going to be part of our recovery from this pandemic.
Okay, Consul General, you mentioned e-commerce a little bit earlier, which is a sector that the pandemic has propelled into an even larger role, of course, in our economic health. What are some of the some of the information in the chapter on the e-commerce sector, and how is that going to work?
Well, first of all, thank you. The chapter most specific to digital trade is chapter 19 in USMCA, and it already understands within its articulation that e-commerce and its regulation is going to be an evolution, because the E part of the commerce and the commerce part of the e-commerce is clearly in an evolutionary stage, and we can't constrict it by putting rules on it. We have to allow for its growth. So just the idea that the chapter itself allows for the evolutionary nature of e-commerce itself as a business line for humanity reflects that this is a 21st century reality. It's prohibiting custom duties being put on goods purchased through e-commerce. It's incorporating a definition of what's called digital products, and it's addressing data localization or data localization, depending on how you want to pronounce it, GIF, GIF, all that good stuff. And when it comes to, again, these are just as the pandemic's hitting us in terms of the 2020 stats that we got, rounding out the first quarter. It was estimated that 129%, and I have to just look at this number clearly because it even surprises me sometimes, and I've read it so many times, year-over-year growth in US and Canadian e-commerce orders as of April 21st, which is an impressive 146% growth in all online retail orders. And I'm just talking about US and Canadian e-commerce, right? And then when we bring that idea of the pandemic in and what that means, the United States and Canada, as Richard said, share those supply chains that are essential, gloves, ventilators, testing kits, masks. And so e-commerce helps in that, the digital trade. These are quick, nimble industries that have had to pop up. Lots of businesses have pivoted to that. E-commerce and the digital possibility that is allowed for this in the USMCA has allowed for that pivot to happen. And then it also, that chapter prevents parties from imposing unnecessary regulatory burden on electronic transactions. It enables, and these seems like simple things, but these are huge in global and bureaucratic speak. It enables paperless trading. And when you're the Consul General, trust me, you deal with a lot of paper. So this idea that a government, a document has paperless trading is amazing, that we would understand that in a global economic framework. And it also ensures that there's the widest and choiciest part of the market from which consumers can make purchases. And then, of course, it prohibits cross-border transfer of personal information. So even in its understanding of data protection, privacy protection for the consumer and for the business owner, that's key. And it promotes access for persons with disabilities to information and communication technologies, makes life a little easier. And the better we can do that, again, we go back to the inclusivity. So those are just a couple of things.
Okay, sounds good. We know that our region is home to a vibrant snowbird and tourism, community, residents and tourists alike. In both of your opinions, this is kind of a two-part question. How can we better support these Canadian nationals leverage their skills, their knowledge, and investment potential within the USMCA framework? And then another part of that question that we're getting from some of our viewers is, do you have any insight on when Canada and the USA will realistically open up their travel again across the border?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I think that following right on with what Zaib was talking about e-commerce, that's certainly, e-commerce has no borders. So Canadians that are here in Nevada and want to do e-commerce certainly have that ability, and this agreement supports that. Our higher educational institutions are interacting with those north of the border and vice versa, and that's helped, I think, a lot with the Canadians that are here. We've done some research, and we have a lot of Canadians that actually live here in the Las Vegas area. Of all the internationally owned homes in Clark County, Canadians own more than 70% of those. To give that some scale, the next highest number are Australians who own homes here, and that's less than 5%. So it's a significant relationship that we have with Canadians here. But their creativity, the exchange rate sometimes is good, sometimes not so good. But the tariff control, though, and the e-commerce, I think, are those things that are really going to allow us to harness that creativity and the skills and knowledge for those folks. And again, it's one of our closest markets. It's the largest free trade zone in the world. And I think that's going to help us come out of this pandemic by supporting the Canadians here and vice versa.
Okay, Consul General, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm under the impression, or I understand that out of the 43 congressional districts in the territory for which your consulate is responsible, Nevada, Arizona, and Southern California, the district that exports the largest amount, right? Over $800 million worth of goods and services. Can you tell us what, you're smiling, very proud of that. Can you tell us what some of those exports are, and kind of what's been the reaction of some of the delegates in those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You're absolutely right, Mary Beth. The reason I'm smiling is because I think, when people hear that we're representing Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, I think there's some preconceived notions of what that might mean to the Canadian market. And then to hear that it's actually District 2, as I said, represented a little earlier, I gave it away. Congressman Mark Amidai, since 2012, has been representing that district. And we were all, and I think shout out to the teams at the BCCN and ours at the Consulate to sort of crunch those kinds of numbers, because you can walk into people's offices and say, look, we're so important, or we're so united, but it really takes the data to help get across what is most meaningful about the relationship. And friendship, of course, is meaningful, and getting along is meaningful, but so is trade and commerce and business. At the end of the day, these are mutually beneficial relationships. And so the fact that Congressman Amidai's district mines nearly 80% of all the gold in the US, making it the 4th largest gold producer in the world, is important, because there's many Canadian companies attached to that, like Barrick Gold, Cortez Gold, Marigold Mining, Bald Mountain. They lead in that. And they also, within that district, then lead in some of the employment numbers. 11,000 Nevadans are directly employed by the industry. So that's also a really important part of what is meaningful to that district and to Canada. It's not just mining. It's grain and oilseed. It's office furniture and fixtures. It's springs and wire products. It's veneer, plywood, and engineered wood, and apparel. And then the service exports are on top of that. So when you think about travel, transportation services, business, professional, technical services, royalties, because of the entertainment sector, equipment installation, maintenance, and repair, that's again a 360 of why District 2 is so important to Canada and why the Canadian market is so important to District 2 and to Nevada. And then what does that lead to? Like I talked about earlier, leads to some flag flying, which is great. But it also leads to folks like Congressman Amanai being there on Capitol Hill to fight against and to speak out against those kinds of tariffs that I talked about, Section 232 tariffs earlier. He was a leading cause and has moved the dial on a lot of issues that affected Canada for the better, whether it's remarks that he gives in the press and in public addresses, or whether it's his work in Capitol Hill or on Capitol Hill and picking up those phones and getting into people's rooms. I guess now a little more virtually, but before then, sort of knocking on those doors and saying, hey, here's what Canada has to offer. Here's what Canada has to say. It's really important, and we're really proud of District 2 and couldn't thank them enough.
Okay, Richard, you've touched on this a little bit, but let's go back to the business sectors. And what areas of Nevada do you think are ripe opportunities for Canadian business investment, and vice versa? Conversely, what would you say, in what ways can we encourage Nevadans to look into doing business in Canada?
Well, we all know from our perspective, Nevada is the best place in the country to do business. We have a very low regulatory burden, very low tax base, or tax burden rather, and just really a great market to work from. I think many of the service industries are ripe for Canadians to do business here. As we grow, certainly hockey. I mean, we've got our hockey team, and that's Canada's national pastime. But it's not just the sporting team itself or the football team, the Las Vegas Raiders, but all the businesses that support that. And I've spoken to a number of companies that have businesses that do that. They're in the entertainment side or the production side of those major pro sports types of industries. So that's certainly right. The tech sector is another one we've touched on earlier, so I won't belabor that, but certainly the ability to do tech here and the creativity that comes from the folks in Canada is great. Call centers. TELUS is an international company based out of Canada, and they have a significant call center here that provides support for countries all over the world. Mining, certainly, we're the center of the universe for mining in North America. All due respect to my friends in Ontario and some of the other provinces, but the mining sector here has such a great amount of expertise, and I know there's a lot of interaction between the Canadian mining companies and the Nevada mining companies that are based here. And then for the Nevada folks, tourism is such a big thing here. We have a lot of information and expertise that we can share north of the border. I know the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority has offices in Canada. We work with them. We work with Destination Canada as members of the Business Council to promote both sides of that equation. But Canada has such amazing things to see, in wide open spaces and beautiful parks, that there are some great things there for Nevada businesses to involve themselves in. There's a company here that manufacturing can't be overstated. There's a company here, not to isolate one too many, but Creative Tents is a company that's based here, and I know they've been looking at Canada they make these massive tents that are aircraft hangars and covers for outdoor sporting fields and that sort of thing. And I know they've been looking at Canada. So that sort of connectivity, I think, is really what's going to be in the near term.
Okay. Consul General, the Vegas Chamber is extremely collaborative. We've formed several strategic partnerships with the LVGEA, with other chambers, other organizations. Are there some ways that you could recommend that the Vegas Chamber could potentially collaborate with local government entities, other organizations in closer tandem with the Consulate General, with your office, to increase development, investment, and job growth, things like that?
Great, thank you, Mary Beth. First of all, yeah, what's so great about this conversation is that it's built on a real healthy foundation of partnership already. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, that idea of the private and public sectors coming together in Nevada on behalf of Canada is really important, like it was in the case of the Section 232 tariffs. And I don't mean to keep belaboring that point, but it's an important marker in the relationship. And it's an important marker on the economic relationship. And it's an important marker also on this idea of what the regional economy means. And the Chamber and other great organizations that you work with, and working with Richard's team at the BCCN, these are exactly the kinds of things which we need to keep going. We can't you know, assume that USMCA, because it's happened and now it's coming into enforcement, that this will kind of naturally occur. It takes concerted effort on the ground, partnerships, and proximity. So it's so great that we've been able to pivot into this kind of virtual world, because we're going to need to continue in that. This idea that Richard mentioned, you know, when he talks about all the sectors and companies, the Chamber they're important members of the Chamber as well, whether they're direct members or part of the ecosystem that the membership, you know, is foundationally represented from an economic standpoint. That's important, I think, to organizations like yours. It's definitely important to the Consulate. The Consulate, as Richard said, is a strategic hub, is a convener, is a facilitator. And while we're based out of Los Angeles for sure, we have committed to being on the ground more in Nevada. And I think Richard will attest to this, that our team is very closely connected with his and with him. And whether we're in the same jurisdiction or not, what this is pandemic time has also taught us is that we can stay more connected, and we're going to need to be, because USMCA is also a really large agreement. And it's comprehensive, but when things are really new and, you know, form breaking, they also need a lot of help in kind of understanding and being able to activate. There's so many mechanisms in it that it might be confusing. And so it'll probably take more forums like this and more experts, even beyond folks like myself, I'll be honest, in really helping businesses get connected to how to take advantage of this amazing system. Because I'm part of the mouth that helps sell it, right? I'm part of the brain trust that helps hopefully inspire people to want to learn about it more, but I don't have all the answers, and I am not the person that's going to be able to help you specifically, but I will be able to, and with you and with folks like Richard, be able to open doors, get people into the right meetings, get people connected in the right way, whether they're small, medium enterprises, whether they're big legacy institutions, or whether there are these new communities and businesses like we talked about, you know, from gender parity standpoint, from a diverse standpoint, from an Indigenous and Native American standpoint. We want to really be there for you and be there at the benefit of the consumers and the business owners of Nevada. So we're committed to always staying connected.
Okay. I think our next question comes from someone in the healthcare industry. It sounds like they're a bit of an expert. This question is there opportunity in the delivery of healthcare services, in particular, high-cost steerable surgeries such as knee and hip replacement or bariatric surgery, where the wait time in Canada is sometimes 1 to 2 years?
The short answer to that, Mary Beth, is yes. Okay. There are some opportunities here. It's an interesting, I'll have to leave it to Zaib to sort of describe or navigate the Canadian healthcare system and how they make those referrals and that sort of thing. But oftentimes when there's a service that's not available for that length of time, there are referral services for those types of services into the United States. Just recently, working with a local doctor that does CT scans and MRI scans and that sort of thing. There's a specific tool that we were trying to get into the Vancouver area because those folks are being referred into the United States for that service. So, but with that, I'll leave it to Zaib in terms of how those referrals occur.
Thanks, Richard. So, you know, the healthcare system in terms of services really works from a provincial standpoint. Each province, like each state, has its own while there is universal health care from a federal standpoint in terms of availability, the actual administration, the payout, the actual treatment, and that whole administrative part of it actually falls on the provinces. So as Richard said, we're happy to connect with you, with folks through the BCCN, and make sure, you know, there are, everyone is identified with what opportunities there might be across the country. But from a federal standpoint, we wouldn't necessarily be the ones to be the repository of that. We'd connect you to those areas, those regions, and those provinces, because they each have their own structures ultimately of how it works. And they each also, just to be specific, also have their own wait times. Wait times are really actually disparate depending on the province, depending on the system.
Okay, well,
and we'd be happy to, Mary Beth, we'd be happy to coordinate any of those questions and conversations if anybody needs any help.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you. We appreciate it. As always, you know, both of you have just been tremendous. We really appreciate all your work with the USMCA. Are there any kind of closing thoughts or other facts that you can share with our audience about Canada and Nevada, or Canadians in Nevada for that matter? I know we have some on the line today.
Sure. Well, I can tell you that Canadians are the #1 international visitor to Las Vegas. And as we start to recover, that's going to be important. They're our #2 trading partner. And the only reason they're not the #1 trading partner is Switzerland buys up most of our gold. So in terms of value, that's how that breaks down. You've already come to understand that Congressional District 2 is the largest trading district in the Consul General's service territory with Canada. 83,000 jobs are dependent upon our trade relationship with Canada. But in essence, I mean, it's Canada and the United States, Canada and Nevada. It's really important to understand that we've got more than a century and a half of a relationship, and we have a shared geography, similar values, common interests, deep connections, and powerful multi-layered economic ties. Our cultures are so similar, and it's very important to understand that those connections will always be the case, and the common elements there really will help us, both Nevada and Canada, recover from this pandemic.
Well, again, I appreciate your time. And at the Vegas Chamber, we're very proud of our own Canadian import, Jim Anders. He's our Vice President of human resources. So we appreciate that a lot. So again, Richard Perkins, thank you so much for being with us today. Mr. Consul General of Canada, Zaib Shaikh, we appreciate your service and thank you for all your work. And again, to our members, we want to thank you for being with us today. We'll put a lot of this information on our website. We will rebroadcast this on our website as well, so it will be available if anybody has questions. And as always, feel free to reach out to us anytime at the Vegas Chamber. Thank you again so much.
Thanks for hosting.
Everyone. Thank you, Mary Beth. That was great. Nice to see you again, Richard.
You too.
You too, Zaib.
Take care.